All right, here we are, lawyertalkpodcast.com. That's where you check us out. If you want to, people are asking, how do I get the longer versions of the little clips that they're seeing on Facebook or one of the other socials? Lawyertalkpodcast.com. It's a website where you can see get all the episodes in audio form, but it also has links to the YouTube or wherever the heck else we post this. Well, look, today I'm going to talk about my own doom scrolling. I was scrolling something this morning on, I don't remember what the platform was, but I see these guys. And look, before I even go there, I'm going to tell you, I try to avoid all politics on this show. I'm not taking positions one way or another. But what I do like to do is take some of these topics that are politically hot and look at them from a legal standpoint without giving an opinion on the politics. And that's what I'm going to do today. I saw this video of a guy on a college campus, and he was a state university. So now I'm setting the frame here because it's a government run institution, a state university, meaning the government pays for it or the taxpayers pay for it. So that changes things. And anytime there's a constitutional question, by the way, you probably heard me harp on this, you have to have government action. In other words, I can't violate your right to free speech because I'm a private actor. So if I say, shut the heck up in my office, you can't talk here, you're not going to be able to go claim free speech. Now, you might have some other actions against me, but it won't be a First Amendment claim. So that's the scene. Now, back to what I was saying. There's these guys on campus, and they got these big signs, maybe 3x5 poster board signs made out of that corrugated plastic, and they're anti-abortion signs. So these guys are, their message is Christian, their message is anti-abortion. And then you sort of see, and they videotape, I'm sure some of you have probably seen this guy. Anyway, you see in the background, there's a golf cart that comes up. And in the golf cart, you can just tell that it's like some dude who's got the lanyard on and some other gal who's got clearly university credentials, and they're just watching this guy. And eventually they come up and they say, look, you can't do what you're doing. And the guy's like, well, why not? Why can't I do what you're doing? Well, we have these restrictions. You're not allowed to have signs that are bigger than 2 feet by 4 feet. I might have screwed up the measurement. So if you've seen the video, you can correct me. I don't care. But you're not allowed to have signs that are bigger than 2 feet by 4 feet, and they have to be made of either cardboard, poster board, or foam board, and they can't be made of this corrugated plastic stuff. And the guy's like, really? And the woman says, yeah, that's the rule. Here's our pamphlet, and you can go to the department or the house of, we'll call it like free speech affairs or something at the university. And, the guy's sort of nonplussed, I think would be the right word. But the guy's sort of like, well, this is insane. And he looks over, and around the corner there, or right across the way, is a vendor who is set up. And the vendor has, lo and behold, a sign that is bigger than the one the guy's holding, or about the same size. And the guy looks over and says, well, he's got signs. What's the deal? And the gal says, well, that's a different department. That's vending, and you have to get a vending license. Now, the guy we're talking about is clearly educated, or he has educated himself on what some of these rules are. And he says, well, do they need a permit to be here? And how's this work? What's going on? And she says, well, they're permitted, but they're offered on a limited basis to be a vendor, and that's a different thing. So they don't have the same restrictions. And then the guy goes over and looks, and there's Jehovah's Witnesses, and they've got signs that are the same size, just like our guys, right? So, or just like not our guys, but just like the abortion guy. And he's saying, look, they look over there. And our guy even goes and talks to those people and says, what's going on? Have you ever been told not to do this? And they say no. And then lo and behold, later in the video, and look, this is all clipped, I'm sure. So, it's edited. I'm summarizing. But I'm summarizing to make a point because I'm going to get to what the law is. Our guy's talking to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they say, well, we've never been told anything. We're fine. And then lo and behold, there's video later in the series or later in the clip of the same gal going to talk to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and she's saying, well, look, you can't use these kind of signs because they're corrugated plastic. She goes, but you at least have the corners rounded, so you understand the concern. And apparently the concern is the corrugated plastic are sharp. So if somebody grabs her, they can be used as, they can cause some damage. And, I don't know. But that's their regulation. All right. So what the heck is really going on? First of all, we have a state university, meaning this does implicate the First Amendment. The government can't, or the government is restricted by what it can do based on the First Amendment, or the First Amendment restricts the government on limiting free speech because it's a public university. We pay for it. We're taxpayers. So we have a First Amendment issue. That's the first question, meaning this could be a free speech First Amendment issue. Secondly, the second question is going to be, can the government regulate it? Can the government tell Mr. Abortion or Mr. Jehovah's Witness or Mr. Vendor what they can and can't do, or that they cannot be on campus talking about what they want to talk about? Now, look, this rarely comes up in situations where people are handing out flyers for a festival, or people are talking about a non-controversial. I'm trying to come up with a non-controversial topic. I can't even do it. But think of a non-controversial topic on a college campus, and you might even be able to flip it. So if it's a pro-abortion topic on a certain college campus, that may not be controversial at all, but the flip might be controversial. Or if it's an anti-Jehovah's Witness protester or demonstrator, and that may not get the controversy that the other does. So think of a non-controversial. These rarely come up in those settings. They almost always come up when the speech itself is controversial or political. And I've told the story on this show before or elsewhere. I remember as a kid, my dad was driving. We were driving down High Street, and I looked over High Street here in Columbus, Ohio, and I looked over at where the Capitol was. I didn't even know what was the Capitol. I was pretty young by then. And there's all these guys in these white robes and hats and masks. And I was like, Dad, what is that? And that's the KKK. So the KKK on a Saturday morning had sort of done this. They were protesting on the state, or I don't know what the hell they call what they do, but they were on the State House lawn having a rally, I guess. And there's people screaming and yelling at them or whatever. Obviously, that's a controversial topic. This is where that stuff happens. All right, back to our story. So how do we break this down? First, you've got the First Amendment. So we've got a situation where the government has to be held accountable by the First Amendment. And the issue becomes how much regulation, how much control, what can the university do to either stop the speech, control the speech, regulate the speech? And there's a standard for it, believe it or not. And what you've heard me talk about these, but I'm really digging into them today. These are what we call time, place, and manner restrictions. In other words, the government, our court has said, our U.S. Supreme Court has said for years that the government can't regulate the content of speech, but it can regulate the time, place, and manner of the speech. So, for instance, what time can somebody go with a bullhorn on a college campus and start screaming their message, whatever the message is? And where on a college campus can they do that? And how can they do it? So the bullhorn is the manner of speech. So you can sort of think, that it wouldn't be right. I mean, it would be different than regulating the content of speech if the university would say, look, you can't go into a classroom hallway with a bullhorn while classes are going on inside and start screaming about pick an issue, screaming about Iran, screaming about Israel, screaming about abortion, screaming about anti-abortion, screaming about Christianity or about Islam. You can't do that in the hallway with a bullhorn. And I think we would all sort of say, yeah, that makes sense. You shouldn't, free speech or not, you shouldn't be able to do that. The university should be able to say, look, you can't do that here. Now, what they can't do, well, we'll get to it actually. So that would be a valid, probably time, place, and manner restriction. Now, how do we determine if it's valid? Like anything, we lawyers or courts, we come up with these ridiculous standards that they sound great when you say them and they look good when you write them, but when you try to give them definitions, it gets really difficult. And that's sort of what we have here. Here's the test. I'm just going to summarize it and we'll break it down. So the restriction must be content and viewpoint neutral, meaning the rule cannot be based on the message, topic, or the speaker's political stance. Well, that makes sense, right? So you can't say you're not allowed to shout Free Palestine and you're not allowed to shout I love Christ but you can shout this other thing. You can't do that. So that's regulation based on content. The second the second part of the test is it has to be narrowly tailored. The regulation must directly advance the significant governmental interest, maintaining safety, for instance, preventing class disruption, for instance, protecting property. And this has to be done without restricting more speech than is necessary. And here's where things get sort of wonky or semantical, I will say. The regulation must directly advance the significant government interest. Now, that significant government interest is somehow different than a compelling government interest, because in other contexts that are not time, place, and manner, it has to be a compelling government interest, not just a significant one. What's the difference? You tell me. I don't know. It has to serve, the third part has to serve a significant interest. You must have a legitimate, concrete objective for the rule, which is typically tied to its educational mission. I'm focusing on college campuses here, folks, but this actually applies in all sorts of time, place, and manner restrictions. That one of the biggest cases was Ward v. Rock against racism. It was a case out of New York. I think it had to do with noise controls or decibel controls on rock concerts in Central Park. So that's really and then finally, I guess, if there is another one, they have to leave open ample alternative channels. The policy has to provide adequate alternative times, places, and ways for individuals or groups to communicate their message to the intended audience. So you can't just say, look, you can't, you could just say, you can say you can't do it in the hallway or in the classroom, but guess what? We have this quad out here, or we have these public walkways, and you can go out there. All you have to do is go apply for a permit. We'll give it to you, and off you go. Now, where do things go sideways? In the case that we're talking about, we'll go back to our guy with the abortion sign. I think what he was pointing out is that, well, let's start with the regulation. The regulation says, look, signs have to be a certain size and they have to be made of a certain material. And there's actually, you can come up with a decent argument for that. You can envision signs made out of this hard plastic that if people grab it and it turns into a fight, somebody can get cut. Maybe, maybe not. But the problem with it is that the guy was pointing out, well, look, you're applying that to me, but not to everybody else. Now we have what could be a reasonable restriction, a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction, but it wasn't applied neutrally based on, or not based on content. So it's a pretty good argument to say, look, you don't like my anti-abortion stance, so you're coming up to me saying you can't do this because your sign's made of plastic and not cardboard, foam, or poster board, but you're letting the Jehovah's Witnesses over there do the same thing. And I think the university is now going to be the university now is going to have to come up with a good reason why they're enforcing it against one guy, not the other. And I think in the video we're talking about, they quickly realized that. So they said, well, we're going to fix that right now. We're going to go enforce it against them too. But heretofore, we never have. I think they may also, whether they could justify having different regulations for vendors with signs, guys selling trinkets or food, versus protesters with signs, maybe. Because you could make an argument that, look, you're very unlikely to have anybody even hinting around at violence because somebody's selling their artwork or hamburgers. But you might come up with, you can easily come up with a scenario where controversial speech, regulated or not, might cause some disruption on the campus and therefore other problems. So I can get my head around maybe that restriction on the type or the poster board you're allowed to use, but you certainly can't do it if it's different for one but not the other. And I think we all understand that. Then the question becomes, if they tell this guy, the other question that came up is they said, well, you have to be over here off this sidewalk and you want to, you have to stay over there. That one I can get my head around because, look, you can't block a sidewalk where students are walking. And as long as they apply that neutrally, in other words, it's the same for everybody, all is good. The universities, everybody gets into trouble when they try to treat people differently than other people because quickly courts are going to say you're doing that because of what they said. This has come up recently in other situations where you have speakers on campus, and the speakers on campus are coming in, and the campus says, look, there's just way too many security concerns for you. We're not going to have you on campus. But then the opposite viewpoint of that speech, whatever it would be, They let those speakers come on campus, and then the question is, does the campus responsible for supplying security? And then there's even stories where guys with the controversial speech saying, look, you don't have to worry about security. I'll supply it myself. I'll pay for it. And then they've sort of backed the university into a corner saying, we're still not going to let you do it. And this is where the First Amendment sort of takes over. It becomes a restriction on free speech and not a valid time, place, and manner restriction. So I hope that breaks it down. I mean, look, I love it. I love free speech. I love the exchange of ideas. I remember in my teenage years, or in my college years, I did a trip over to England. It was like a pre-law program. Ohio State had a pre-law program in Oxford, England. And I went over for the summer and spent some time studying pre-law or whatever it was. But I remember going to Hyde Park, which is supposed to be the bastion of free speech, Hyde Park in London, where guys would literally stand on a stump or stand on a soapbox, and they would just be there giving speeches all day long, just talking, hecklers screaming at them and the whole 9 yards. That's free speech. That's what we love, and it should be ingrained into our philosophy. I heard as part of this later on in the debate, in the video I saw, somebody was threatening to sue somebody for slander because they said your opinions are wrong and you're saying I think this, and then you're stating something that's wrong. I don't buy that. Those are we need an exchange of ideas. Otherwise, bad ideas take over. So I don't believe in regulating speech, even offensive speech. I do believe in valid time, place, and manner restrictions. You can't shut down High Street in the middle of rush hour. I think it's important that we understand what the rules are so we can follow the rules, and then you can get your head around why the rules are in place. So look, you got a question, you got a topic, you want me to cover something more on this, I'll be happy to do it, or any other topic, go to lawyertalkpodcast.com or leave me a comment in the socials. I'll be happy to hit it.